Om Purusham Artam Shunyanam Gunanam Prati Prashavaha Koivolyam Swarupa Pratistam Vachiti Shakti iti. Om peace, peace, peace. That powerful primordial force of awareness, responsible for returning involving consciousness to its source, and which strips nature of name and form, accomplishes both, and the soul attains its final liberation. Om peace, peace, peace. Om Vedanta Siddhanta Niruktiresha Brahmaiva Jivaham Sakalam Jagadcha Akanda Rupa Stitir Eva Moksho Brahmadvitiye Shrutayaha Pramanam. Om Shantihi, Shantihi, Shantihi. It is a sure and certain proof of the Vedanta that all is Brahman. Time, space, living beings, and the world. Living in constant recognition of this fact is what is called enlightenment. Brahman is pure and perfect, and one without a second. And the revealed scriptures are the apt and final proof of this. Om peace, peace, peace. Om Sahana, Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavo Vahoy Tejasvi Navaditamastu Ma Vidvishovahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman, divine reality, protect us. May Brahman sustain us. May Brahman illumine our thinking consciousness. May we not find fault with each other, with the world, or with the teachings. And may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, and may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om. We are about to embark on a 3-class series that's generally around bondage and liberation. We're calling it by that wonderful statement that Sri Ramakrishna gave when he was living. The soul bound is mankind. That same soul free is God. So that gives us a great clue into what Vedanta calls false superimposition, or Vyavarta in Sanskrit, or adhyasa. And it's a great premise and principle in Vedanta which allows us to understand a little bit more all of the coverings and the impediments and obstacles that you could say either accompany life or grace life, depending on whether you're ready to face them off and turn poison into nectar, as they say in the Tantric Darshana. We want to be able to take what is sweet in the beginning and be careful of that, but what's sour in the beginning and sweet at the end, that's more like it. That's according to Sri Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. So that would mean, of course, what's sweet is what's pleasant and amiable to everyday life and happy making, pleasant to the senses. But what's sour in the beginning is discriminating between the wheat and the chaff, or the real and the unreal, and withdrawing from the unreal, doing one's spiritual disciplines called sadhana, and coming to a final conclusion, Siddhanta, which I just chanted, Vedanta Siddhanta Niruktya Resha. It's that final conclusion of Vedanta. In the end, all reckons that all of this is Brahman. Existence is. So Vedanta calls that Punyata, and also thinks of Shunyata as a stage on the way to it, the emptiness leading to the fullness. And both of them actually have in yoga a kind of title that they're assigned. One's called Abhava Yoga, which is the yoga of no moods, nothing, very, very peaceful and indrawn. And then that one called Maha Yoga, which is really a kind of combination of all four yogas. The wisdom with its discriminating element, the bhakti with its intense love for God, karma with its selfless service, and raja or dhyan yoga or ashtanga, Patanjali's yoga, if you point straight to it, with its 8-limbed concomitants. All of these being very important to the Mahayoga, especially when they're synthesized. Of course, it's a very rare soul we see, particularly nowadays, that has synthesized all four of the yogas. But people who have mastered even one are rather rare, I think, especially in the Western cultures. Some people are working, maybe even in the altruistic spirit, but that work isn't really specified as a way to God, as a yoga, as a way to be in union. Yoga means union, really. So the mind changes around teachings like that, which is precisely the point when you say that soul bound is man, but the same soul, that's the essential part of that quote, the same soul free is God. So that means the soul is the same, whatever the case. If you take from one of my teachers, Swami Nityasrupananda, who was the author of, the translator of this book, Ashtavakra Samhita, the only book Sri Ramakrishna kept near him, and which he had Swami Vivekananda, the young Narendra Nath, read to him occasionally about non-duality. So might be put just in one sloka, chapter 218. I have neither bondage nor freedom. Having lost its support, this illusion of Maya has created. The universe, though existing in me, does not really exist. So it's not just bondage that you want to be free of, and we might look at that later, but it's also the thought of liberation, because the soul is, as Swamiji quoted to us and coined for us, ever free, never bound. Musical CD I put out, which I used that as the title for, ever free, never bound. So it's not something that once was not free and got bound suddenly and then got free again. It's you have to look beyond both of those as being false superimpositions over the ever-free soul. So in that way, Sri Ramakrishna's statement then is very powerful. It points to non-duality through these two opposites. So we've often said that that there are pairs of opposites that are very difficult to deal with, and very obvious, though, that should be dealt with, like happiness and sorrow, and right and wrong, and virtue and vice. People's minds get tied up with these lower dualities. The dvandva mohena, Krishna mentions in the Gita, pairs of opposites that delude, moha. But there are higher dualities which the soul cuts its teeth on non-duality for, if you want to put it that way. And would be things like form and formlessness, if you want to ponder that. Because there again, you're going to find out that both of those, that Brahman is beyond both of those. It's not just formless, because at least in India, nature is also formless. Surprisingly enough, that what we're seeing is the formless nature, but we're not seeing the seed to nature, which is called unmanifested prakriti. Prakriti being that word. Sometimes they interchange that with Maya, nature, prakriti. So that being the case, then you could point to a formlessness that you thought existed and that you imagine that you're in when you're meditating. Ah, formlessness, you see, I have no thoughts now, but the seeds are still present, not only for your thinking, but for everything that you don't see when you shut your eyes and don't hear when you close your ears. So beyond both form and formlessness then is Brahman. And so that's a very subtle, as you can tell just by hearing the description of it, a very subtle cut to this tier of dualities that the soul has to try and put to rest if they want the non-dual experience, called nirvikalpa or asampragyata in yoga, or nirvana in Buddhism, or busho in Zen. That non-dual experience of the soul that is merged completely. Talking about it is difficult because the soul never merges, it's already that, so it has to pretend like it's separate from itself so that it can merge. Sort of like a hailstone, crystallizes itself from water and gases and then plunks into the ocean and gives itself up. It's all a sort of play or a sort of dream. So the question comes forward, and we took it up in satsang last week, although many of you didn't hear it, is that sermon that Sri Ram gave to Tara, this woman that he met that had just lost her husband. And the question coming forth from her after hearing about her husband was not the body, although his body was laying there right in front of them, dead, as it were, which is the fate of material things and insentient things. Then she hears him talk and then says, whose bondage is this then? What are the senses experiencing? So she's going into this Atma vichara from the standpoint of suffering and wanting to, I'll read a bit of that for you in a little while. But this is all a short preamble on this first class of bondage and liberation being a very high and subtle duality. It's certainly not the case that we want to pretend them both away and then say I'm all right, you're all right, kind of the New Age mantra, because then of course that's not knowledge, getting rid of ignorance. So you could say knowledge and ignorance are something that may have to persist in you in order for you to solve these dualities of form and formlessness and bondage and liberation. Sri Ramakrishna used to put it very nicely, if you get a thorn in your flesh, it's deep in there, it hurts, so you look around, there's nothing to take it out with, so you see the bush, you see, that gave you the thorn, you borrow another thorn off that same bush, and take the first thorn out with the second thorn. And then what do? Keep them both in a pocket or something to remember that painful memory? And you cast them both away. So he's describing knowledge and ignorance. As long as you have ignorance, then you must seek knowledge. You must seek for the... But the kind of symbology is they both came off the same bush. They all are coming from Manas, as Ram tells Tara, which I'll read to you a little bit later. It's all coming from the mind, Manas. And the mind is the field of ever-arising phenomena, Nagarjuna says in Buddhism. Or we would say the same in Vedanta. This is bubbles rising in the ocean of consciousness of the mind. So I chanted at the beginning then, Kaivalya Swarupa Pratishta, Chitti Shakti, she will resolve these things in a consciousness that wants to return to its source. Transmigrating consciousness finds the worlds of name and form coming from the mind, figures that out, knows it to be its own projection, and then withdraws from it. It's all a classic way of getting free after bondage has somehow worked its way into your thinking process. So we chanted that afterwards, made Brahman clear our thinking process. And so that we can live in this state of natural samadhi. Sahaja it's called, just being, never fretting that we're bound nor desiring to be free. So that's sort of the track in which we'll follow as we look deeper into the unreal and the real. Om asat vidyate bhavo na bhavo vidyate sataha, Krishna says to Arjuna. He says the unreal never exists. The real never ceases to be. And so right there you've got kind of that explanation for bondage and liberation. But the truth about both was gained by the seers because they studied both. So they got to a witness standpoint and they looked at what either bound them or used to bind them, if they can remember what it's like. So one of the problems is that when you attain this peace of mind that spiritual practice gives you, then you spend the rest of your time, pass your time contentedly and remain free, as Shankara says, that you begin to forget what it was like to be ignorant. Sort of like trying to remember dreams you had, years ago. It had to be very powerful, and the dream persisted as long as you were dreaming, but when you woke up it went away. So it's much the same, an analogy with bondage and liberation. When you awake from this sleep of ignorance and bondage, and you taste the freedom of the Atman, then Atman all of a sudden isn't bound by the five sheaths anymore. It's not subject to the dualities, Dvandva Mohena. The five kleshas disappear from it. The six passions are not a problem anymore. The 8 fetters don't bind it. The 9 antarayas don't distract it. They don't spoil the picnic. They're called despoilers in yoga. And you say, where did those things go? So like Tara said to Ram, whose bondage is this? She all of a sudden gets awoken, you see, and looks at something completely different, and only a couple moments passed where she heard some words from an enlightened soul. Then all of a sudden, just like that, she's the self again. Isn't it? That soul bound as mankind, the same soul free as God. So there they were, seeming to be two, and company of the holy was how Sri Rama explained it to her, happened and changed her on the spot back to her true nature. So it must be that this ignorance of two-ness and manyness is like darkness in a cave, as Sri Ramakrishna said, and gone in an instant when you bring in the light. So that's why we used to go to our teacher and hear non-duality, Swami Sheshanandaji Maharaj and Swami Nityasrupanandaji Maharaj. We'd go to them and we'd hear the truth from their very lips. They were in their 80s, 90s, and had a lot of experience and had meditated on great books from great souls, great sayings like Ashtavakra. He's bent in 8 places or something. That's because he came out of the womb because of a curse from his father, and then got straightened up later when he saved his father from prison. Beautiful stories about Ashtavakra. But anyway, these souls have come up against the vagaries and vicissitudes and treated them with viveka and vairagya, and come to know vivarta, all the 5 V's, you see. So, and then they've gotten free. Really, they just remember that they were ever free, never bound. That bondage seeped in through the cracks of their sleeping, waking, dreaming, and thinking consciousness somehow. And the house wasn't kept clean. The attic wasn't swept. The floors weren't swept day to day with sadhana. So Shankara would say that. He says, I keep the mirror of my mind polished every day. He knows the mind's not the Atman, but he knows that if it's polished, it's the best reflector for the Atman. And if it gets a little dust on it, a little corrosion, fogged up a bit, over time he doesn't clean it. Like Sri Ramakrishna said, having to polish the brass pots in the Calcutta before, city, before in the temple, before doing the puja, because even overnight they'll begin to get this tarnish on them. So you got them there polishing away. And that's the mind they're talking about. And it's a fine vehicle for liberation, so-called liberation, if you keep it polished and clean. If you let it go for even a day or two, if you're not already haven't already mastered it, then it starts to collect these doubts and confusions, and overlays, false superimpositions, not only at an individual level, but pretty soon you're going to have to contemplate the collective mind and why it does what it does. Your ancestors, for instance. The gods and the goddesses are no picnic. See, when you come to read about them in the scripture. The Trinity is even all of a sudden held suspect. You know, why project, create, and destroy at all if you can stay one with Brahman? So everything about Mahasankalpa is from the first stirring of a vibration in the word down to the element earth, its most solid form, is all of a sudden held up for inspection to things like neti neti or shunyata or thoughts not arising or however you want to call it. So through the passage of time, many kalpas that we're talking about, then we find that many, many different illumined souls have contemplated these great matters and left us with these great teachings, which I just chanted, Shruti, Pramanam, the proof, Pramanam of the Shruti, the highest scriptures like the Upanishads, Gita and so forth. Those are sure and certain proofs of the truth of what we're saying here, that the unreal never is, the real never ceases to be. And so the more the mind hears that, the more often it hears it. For hours at a time in class, for instance. Even after it's sure it knows it, and then loses its certainty and comes back. Until all of that goes away, and the soul doesn't fall victim anymore to belief in worlds, bodies, senses, objects, thoughts, matter, energy, and thought. The great seer Svetashvatar put it. Atman is neither matter nor energy nor thought. So he kind of like told everyone, those are the three things that you're going on here. Energy is prana, right? We'll look at that when we look at this very rare but beautiful system called the 5 cosmic bondages and the 3 great desires. We haven't taken this chart up ever. Very, very rarely have we pulled it out, and I don't think ever in its colorized form, back in the old black and white days. But I'm not going there first because I think we should start with the fact that we're always liberated. And then I'll give you the bad news later. How the soul falls into bondage. This is like, and I'm going to then show you after that how the Buddhists would call it, called the nidanas, the links to 3 births, karmic links to 3 births. So we can put a system like the 5 cosmic bondages in Vedanta next to Buddhism's 12 links called nidanas, which is one of the 3 great teachings of Lord Buddha. One of them is the arising of thoughts, praticca samutpata, and the other was the 8 noble, the 4 noble truths and 8-fold path. And then nidanas was the 3rd major spear he threw at ancestors and humanity, to get them off that loop of bondage that they think they're in or thought they were in, to get some souls free and to have those on record so others will follow, basically. So as far as that same soul free is God, the same soul, so the soul didn't change when it was bound or when it was free. Those were sublations, conditionings, false superimpositions, overlays, like silver in the mother of pearl in the shell. It's actually not silver. Like a gray lump of iron, a ball of iron heated in the fire becomes red and hot, but it's not red and hot, is it? It's just gray and cold. That's its nature. So Sri Ramakrishna used to say that, and Shankara used that as one of the abhava padarthas, it's called. The ways of showing how things borrow consciousness from the Atman, and they're not the Atman. And so one becomes very clear about names, forms, time, space, and the karma, and the 5-fold Maya, Vivekananda outlined it as. And so one will, for then watch, as Sri Ramakrishna said, watch Maya from a distance. study it from a different distance if you study it at all. And they did. That was their secret. They came to know both the unreal and the real, so they could play them off against each other and contrast them, so that the real would be all the more real when all these things were stripped away, like I just chanted. The primordial Shakti, Chitti Shakti, he says, father of yoga, said that, returns transmigrating consciousness to its source, and as it does, strips nature of name and form. So those are all overlays. Those are not actual. It's only the one formless Brahman that's true. Brahman Satya, Jagat Micha, the worlds aren't. They're reflections or emanations, if you want to be kind, or false superimpositions, or reflections, like appearances, like the cold iron ball getting red, and then just take it out of the fire, away from the Atman, it all becomes cold again. You put the mind, you might call that a gray lump of metal, you see, the brain, and take it away from the Atman, that's called ignorance, right? Then it's bound. It just doesn't have any fire of its own. All of a sudden, put it back in the fire of the Atman, it starts to glow. So the mind, oh, the mind's, the Atman. And pretty soon my prana is the Atman. Pretty soon my body's the Atman. The food I'm putting in is the Atman. So it's all a matter of proper and right perspective, which is one of the Eightfold Path teachings of Lord Buddha. Right orientation, right perspective. So speaking about brain, let's look at just exactly who we are. The we, of course, means the I, the real I. And these 13 characteristics of the Atman are one of the gifts of the seers that show us about this. Well, there at the top you see the quote, because when I said brain, I thought of Swami Vivekananda and him saying, it's not in the brain, but in the heart that the Atman, possessed of knowledge, power, and activity, has its seat. The chief nerve center near the heart, called the sympathetic ganglia, is where the Atman has its citadel. So this is one of the things he said in many of his lectures to us in the West in the late 1800s and early 1900s when he was here on 2 occasions. So here you see 13 flowers, little lotus flowers there, and each one is assigned to one of these characteristics. Now, because the whole problem, sensitive problem of becoming is there, like becoming bound, or becoming free, or becoming a human being, or becoming a god, then Advaita Vedanta, in a teaching like this, always insists that you realize that there really are no characteristics in the Atman. There really are no qualities there. So what they tell you is like you go to a forest, nice beautiful green forest, and you want a Christmas tree or something, you cut the tree, bring it back home. There it is in the corner, all nice and green. So you start putting, what do? Lights first, is it? And then icicles, remember the icicles? The silver tinsel stuff you put on it, maybe some spray snow, and then you start putting ornaments, glittery little delicate things that you knock off and they burst, and you get spanked for it later by your parents or whatever. And you put this big thing on the top, what is that? Thinking today, and last night I was dreaming it about Christ protecting all his children. But there's a beautiful hymn. So anyway, there's the Christmas tree there, and okay, it's not green anymore. So this is the way they would describe characteristics here. These are not the ornaments on the tree. These are, these are not qualities on the tree. Atman doesn't have those. Look at the word inherent, thankfully we have in English. Something that's intrinsic is another good word. Intrinsic to the tree, that's the green of the tree. So these are the green of the tree. The things that people superimpose over the tree are false superimpositions. You could, make them up if you want. Oh, the icicles are such and such. The tinsel stuff is the glitter of the world, and the ornaments are human bodies, and so forth and so on. Maybe the crown at the top of the tree is the Savior, who's really the exemplar, and says, please don't call me a Savior, keep me as an exemplar. And so all of those are characteristics or qualities on the outside, but this is the green of the tree. So this is who you are, or what the Atman is by nature. And it's not a process that it gets it. We'll maybe look at that again, because we studied that at the seminar a couple weekends ago about the meaning of moksha or mukti. It's not something that's going to happen to you. It's something always here at hand. And so you wake up to it. Maybe you could be kind to the process and say, I remembered it over stages. That's allowable. But when it dawned on you, it was true that was the truth, because you'd never heard anything like it before. And it woke you up, and nothing else did. Everything else sort of put you to sleep. So ajaha would be one of these. Means, Shankara says, it's unborn. Death nor fear I have none, nor any distinction of caste. Neither father nor mother, nor even a birth have I. You recognize it, right, from the Nirvana Shatkam? Namritshor na shanka, name jati beda, pita naiva me naiva, mata ma janmaha. It goes on. Chidananda Rupaha Shivoham Shivoham Om. Oh, that's ajaha. I have no birth, I have no death. Namritshor, no death. And Pita Naiva, no father. Me Naiva, Mata, mother, na Janmaha, no mother nor Janmaha, birth. I don't have any of those. They're not mine. They don't belong to the Atman. They belong to the mind, as Ram would say it. They belong to the sankalpas of my mind. Do they even belong to nature? That wouldn't be the ultimate source, because nature came from the mind too. Their nature is all a bunch of thoughts you're having that turn solid, called the waking state. So ajaha, unborn, stanuhu, stable on the other side. This is from here. Adoration to myself, impervious to decay, who outlasts even the dissolution of the universe, from Brahma down to a blade of grass. So from the highest form, or formless form, down to the grossest form, like earth, all of that came forth from the self, from the mind, at the behest of the self, if you want to say, because the mind too is just that lump of cold metal. Can't do much. It's doing even less as a brain than it did as a mind. Probably should have left it as a mind, but you took it into a brain, called in the human body, and then it started to think too much and too shallow. And then it started to believe what it thought in. And then you were in a mess, you see. Then the swamp happened. Then Nityaha, absolute. If you have known Atman as the one existence, and that nothing else exists, for whom, for what desire do you trouble yourself for anymore? One of my students likes that as the favorite thing he ever heard Vivekananda say. If you've known the Atman, what do you trouble yourself for anymore? Because you know that the Atman's the only reality, and everything else is just kind of a byproduct. An emanation, a reflection, a false superposition. We've borrowed as many words as we can in English The Vedantists have done it, the Hindus have done it, the Jains have done it, the Buddhists have done it. This Lord Kapila did it. In the ancient Sanskrit and in the derivative Pali language that was there being used when Lord Buddha was putting down, they were putting down Buddha's teachings in the Dhammapada. So they've thought of all the ways in which they could try to explain this to you. But it is Nityaha, absolute. And when you say it is, we mean you are. It's not fail to make the connection that thou art that. There is but one, the free knower, self, without a name, without a form or stain. In him is Maya dreaming all this dream. The witness, he appears as nature, soul, and thou art that. Sannyasin bold, Seom Tat Sat Om. One of the beautiful verses out of the Song of Sannyasin. There is but one, free, the knower, the self, without a name, without a form or stain. In him is Maya dreaming all that dream, and thou art that. See, so we don't just go and hear about the Atman from someone, try and keep awake, and then maybe fall asleep, and then take off thinking I understood it, or it's just too much repetition. You have to connect this into yourself and contemplate it in your free time. Actually, free time really for the yogi is dedicated time. There's no such thing as free time, because time always comes with a cost. Free time? What are you talking about? So I'm going to use that time which I have off from bondages, from the bondage making Maya, to dedicate myself to the realization of these truths. If there are 13 of them, then I'll memorize them, and I'll know who said it, and why they said it, and I'll know them to be illumined souls, and I'll follow suit. They're my exemplars, and then I will follow and join the province of the enlightened, as Gaudapada said. Come join us. Become a knower of Brahman. Puranaha. What the Puranas and scriptures are, you've heard of them. They really mean that which is ancient and which saves you, the Puranas. Beautiful teachings. You get a lot of God with form there, Lord Shiva and so forth, the Trinity. But it means really ancient, if you want to come down to one word. So Svetashvatar, whom I mentioned, that's a great Upanishad, by the way. It could be my favorite. It's hard to say. But in some ways it's just a little bit more current than some of the more ancient ones, and applies so much to that time of enlightenment that he lived in with the rishis and their children, how they were passing these on to them. So he says about ancient, to that timeless Brahman be thou devoted, through the primal and ancient cause, Atman, the eternal soul. And then we have Achala, immovable. Ishvashopanishad says, the self is unmoving, yet is faster than the mind. Having preceded the mind, it transcends the senses and outstrips all that runs. So that's why we said speed of sound's pretty fast, isn't it? You're getting it pretty quick across the room. But the speed of light outstrips that. And faster than that's the speed of thought, which are really not going to, but they call that manojavitvam. It's just immediate fast. But faster than all is she, that primal Shakti, that outstrips all that runs. And so that's what you would call not only Achala, immovable, but if you look down a ways, you'll see Sarvagata, all-pervading. That's why she seems like she's fast, because she's already there before you even thought her. And that's her great secret. The all-pervasiveness of the Atman is the great secret. And so it doesn't move, right? It's Achala. So it outstrips all it runs, makes it sound like it moves. but actually you have to put it together with its other characteristics, and that would be sarvagata. It's all-pervasive. It's everywhere, sarva. It's also eternal, which is similar. So, Katha Upanishad, I'm taking the Upanishads here, quite a few of them, says, "The wise do not grieve, having known the bodiless, all-pervasive, supreme Atman, who dwells in all impermanent bodies." So, everything from the bodies of gods to ancestors to human beings to planets, bodies of planets in space. It dwells everything in there, immovable and all-pervasive, ancient. Ancient would really mean timeless. Akala, you could say akala, timeless. Nitya, absolute. There's nothing else that compares to it or can compete with it. And so they describe our true self to us. And then inactive, which then of course goes along with immovable, but in case you didn't quite get it when I said immovable, and you're so into action, I'm going to tell you how it acts without acting, as Krishna says in the Gita. How it makes everything come about as it doesn't move. So, Sri Krishna says that one verily sees who sees that all actions are done in Prakriti alone, and that Atman is actionless. One of our favorite teachings. So where does action take place? It's like asking, whose bondage is this? In nature is where that takes place, and nature is taking place in the mind. And the mind is the cold lump of metal that's getting heated by the Atman. So you work your way back to the source of things. She accomplishes the return of transmigrating consciousness back to its source. Yeah, Father of Yoga was to say, 500, 1,000, 2,000 years later, then the Upanishads said it, or more. Avikaryaha. Yeah, I had a note to myself. The Advaita likes to talk about Avikaryaha. In verse 26 of his 40 verses, he says, Niskarma karma pranam satata karomi nisanga sangarahitam paramam vinodam nirdeha deha rahitam satatam vinodam Gyanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham Gyanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham. About that, then, he says, the Avatut, that's himself, ever free of action, engages in the highest acts free of karma. He enjoys non-attachment in a state of seeming attachment. Dwelling in the body, he enjoys the unimaginable joy of bodilessness. And says, I am pure existence, wisdom and bliss, as boundless as the sky, infinite like space. Sri Ram also uses sky a lot. The Akasha, even the physical Akasha, is a great representative for being untouched by things. Like Sri Ramakrishna used to say, air carries scents on the wind. Like, baking bread. The pigs are around. But the air only carries those momentarily and itself remains unaffected by them. And how much more than the real Akasha, that air sits in, to know that earth has come from water, and those two have come from fire, and those three have come from air, and those four have come from ether. But where does ether come from? They never went there because you couldn't see ether. You actually couldn't see air, but at least you felt it on your face when the wind blew. But ether, it stumped them. So they ended up with 4 elements, some of the systems in different countries. But when they studied ether close up, that is from a distance close up, and they saw, oh, there's where our ancestors went. There's where the gods and goddesses are. That's what we were offering rituals to, and that's where the smoke went. And that's where the tanmatras took them. And that's where the prana flowed. And that's where the psychic prana kicked in. And after that, that's where consciousness of Shakti showed herself, you see. And so they were just on, this inward involution of consciousness in revelation. So it wasn't the world of reflection anymore, it's the world of revelation. Always a good precursor to higher knowledge is revelation. So avikaryaha, Avadit says, I'm free of action, though I engage in it. Karma doesn't come, and I'm bodiless, but I have a body. And I have a mind, but I control it. It thinks or it doesn't think at my behest. It doesn't just roam, you see, or get fragmented. Settle on too many things at once, like a bunch of flies in a pasture. Shashvataha, it's immutable. The I and everything else is based in transformation. Only the Atman is immutable. Want of change is Atman. There's a Zen koan for you in Vedantic style if you want of change is Atman. So what is the Atman? It's want of change. Are you ready to say that? Somebody just wrote me today and said, oh, I was listening to satsang last week, and it just amazes me how you answer questions just like that with the right answers. I try and do that with people who come and ask me, you see. But I do my best, you see. I do my best. But if you're armed with things that you've thought about and they're your realizations, then you have a moment. You see. Oh, here's a moment to get to them. They're asking a question. Why? Because the I is based in transformation. So it cloaks itself all the time. You can't get to me, you see. I'm not letting you in. That's the ego. It means the ego I. Aham kara. Kara means cause, so aham, I am the cause of all this, you see. And I'm the owner of all this, and I possess all this, and I enjoy all this, and tomorrow I'll enjoy everything. It's basically a rundown of Sri Krishna's assessment of the ego in the Gita. So, because of that then, and I'm going on a little bit too long maybe, but this is how we take things apart in Vedanta. Because of that then, you have that one moment where the ego lost its defenses, and they ask a question. This is why I have satsang, you see. You're all-knowing when you read the book, right? Oh, I understand it. See, I know everything because I just read it. Put it down. What do you know anymore? See? What did you retain? And the most important thing is that did you retain the fact that you've got 13 inherent characteristics in you that pretty much prove to you that thou art that, you see. Strike off thy fetters, bonds that bind thee down, of shining gold or darker baser ore. No slave is slave caressed or whipped not free. Fetters though of gold are not less strong to bind. Then office them. Say Om Tat Sat Om. I am that. Can you say that? I am that. I am that. With all the certainty of your past practice, with all the certainty of the words of the seers, with all the certainty of the study of the revealed scriptures that you've been gifted and graced with in this very lifetime. Or are you just going to stay on the surface and have a little bit of knowledge, a little bit of progress, see? But missing the point all the time. I am that. I am the words of the scripture. I am the seers. I am one with the Lord, with the Father. the seers and I are one and the same soul. So you would want to know about the immutable. Avyaktaha is there. Unmanifested. Name, form, and function differ, but Akasha, which holds them, remains unchanged. Similarly, Atman is unaffected by its Maya projections, called souls. Who or what could possibly produce this Atman? So aren't those beautiful little koans there? See, basically, want of change is Atman. The soul bound is man, same soul free as God. And who could possibly produce this Atman? When it produces everything else by its very presence, like a fire changes a cold lump of metal into red heat. It gives everything else its qualities. So you've got it turned around here. See, if I'm bound soul, I'm flavoring everything with my mind ego complex. If I'm a free soul, it's flavored with Atman, which is why Sri Ramakrishna said, good God blog, if I put on green glasses, you see tinted glasses, I see that everything, that color. So that's putting on Brahman glasses. These eyes, what good these eyes if all they see is just pleasures and pain and so forth? What good these hands, it's all they grasp after money and so forth. So I'm rather going to want to change the outlook here. I want love eyes, I want love ears, so that I can hear and see the Lord in action. That was Gaudapada, Shankara's teacher's teacher, the great Advaitin, who said that. Then there's Avyayam, as we reach the end of this list, inexhaustible, with hands and feet everywhere, with eyes, heads, mouths, and ears everywhere. That exists, pervading everything. And that's how Krishna, if he had to prove it, would then touch Arjuna and say, now look. And with his single eye open, all of a sudden Arjuna saw the Lord in everything. And it wasn't all a pretty picture either. It was stunning. Please take that away, he said. Oh, Mother Kali, put down your sword, pick up your flute, and be Krishna again. This is how one song in India puts that. See? Okay, I got the vision I was looking for, I'm sure again. Now turn to your two-armed form with a flute and play nice music for me, you see. I had enough of that, you see. So the vision of the cosmic form, that's called Vishva Rupa Darshanam. You had darshan with the cosmic form in it. It's rare, but it's also something that you have to prepare yourself for as far as possible. So inexhaustible was the idea. That's again from Svetashvatar, who had a family of illumined souls follow him. Families. I mean, talk about your ancestors. I mean, since they know all this about the Atman, they don't really have children. These are mind-born children, not blood-born, or womb-born, or moisture-born, or sweat-born, or sperm-born, or anything like that. These are mind-born. The body was an incidental thing, so then they conferred upon them this highest wisdom. Those souls were fortunate to have a grandsire like Svetashvatar. And how India continues it on through generations, even in dark times, right into the Kali Yuga. Here we are sitting with Sri Ramakrishna and Swamiji, and Holy Mother just passed from the body recently, and drinking in all this wisdom. It's a great boon and blessing both. And we're having a hard time figuring out why more people aren't coming to it. You see. Come, a new man has come. Drink the nectar. The names of Sharda Ramakrishna are storming the boundaries of relative existence like a great flood. There's a beautiful song in India about that. Sharada Ramakrishna Bande Keche Rebai. Sharada Ramakrishna Name Bande Keche Rebai. Vishvabhuvan Vishegalo Ahabole Hari Jai. Radha Ramakrishna Name Bande Keche Rebai. A great flood, the names of Sharada and Ramakrishna, storming the gates of relative existence. Come all and drink. Drink from this bounty. So far out of 7.8 billion, only 5 million have done that. That's not very many. Sounds like a lot. But compared to souls on earth, there's not a lot of souls have discovered this. Which is this? Just one way of putting it in the Hindu Dharma. Avinashi. You see. Yes, if you're out there, brother, namaste. One of my students watching is called Avinashi. Indestructible. That which, when name, space, time, substance, and causation are destroyed, dies not. That is the indestructible, says the Sarva Upanishad. One of those other 99 Upanishads that Shankara didn't get around to in his 32-year-old life to commenting on. Yeah, did 9 or 10 of them, but the other 100 or 99 did not have time for those. But we do study them. They have been put into English by the Ramakrishna Order, and you want to get those minor Upanishads, a little book, paperback called Minor Upanishads. Those are pretty quick reads, sort of like the Kano Upanishad. And of course, quick read, but then you spend time and time and time with them, rolling them over in your mind, savoring them. And then, like intelligent particles, they implode in you. And that's what you get bliss from. Can't get bliss very long for just dancing and singing. See? It's contemplation of the truth inside where the intelligent particles are. And they're streaming from the word Om, and that word Om is one with Brahman. The beginning was the Word was with God, and then it was God. So these are steps you take back inside that all the seers of different religions have taken. Avinashi, nice word. Sarvagataha, we mentioned that already, and it's one of the important ones, all-pervading. So drink these in now, because the hard part comes soon, when you have to find out about the illusion of bondage. Actually, if you know that it's an illusion, or you hear it, that's good news. What's been plaguing you all can be so easily cast. Get thee behind me, Jesus said. He wasn't talking about a two-horned devil with a pitchfork and a tail, you see. That came later, unfortunately, and hell's fires and so forth. He was talking about all things that are unworthy of your time. You, the noble soul, here is what's worthy of your time, and what will illumine you, by stages even, if nothing else. We'll look at that. I have a chart called Time and Enlightenment. So they do provide for a waking up by degrees, even by lifetimes. But there's also bondage by lifetimes. You see, so we have to study both. That's what makes us certain of our true nature. Studying both makes us certain. Can't jump to the highest step and leave the middle steps unexplored. Sarvagataha then, Atman alone is. It is the all-full and blissful consciousness pervading everything. It is the immaculate Jnanam itself, the all-pervasive Akasha as well. The three worlds arise in it, yet they do not affect its true state. Sarvagataha. I think the Advaita also sings about that in verse 21. He sings, yes he does, in bliss himself. Dear Golagu Punariti Name Vibhago Nishtara Sakatam Hitam Name Vibhagaha Konam Hivartulamiti Aname Vibhagaha Gyanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham. Gyanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham. About that. In the self of Atman, all pervasive, such imaginings as divisions and dimensions disappear. Width, length, depth, height, all are so many angular projections of the creative mind. So forget them. Say instead, I am pure existence, wisdom, and bliss, as boundless as the sky, infinite like space. It reminds us of Holy Mothers as, forget your personality. Remember your true self. And there's a beautiful Divine Mother koan for you. Great saying. The Zen koans in Vedanta are called Mahavakyas, the great sayings. So, I'm writing that book right now about Advaita Vedanta and Zen Buddhism, putting them side by side. So many similarities. Of course there would, because Zen Buddhism was some 64 generations later after many of these teachings left India, and finally circled the world and came to Japan, then came back to the US. One of the great Roshis was there at the Parliament of Religions when Swami Vivekananda was there. So that's how these great hands had circled the world, you know, from the subcontinent of Bharta, India, the eternal land, and come together in New York, Chicago. And Zen Buddhist, you know, the center started, Vedanta center started, the direct disciples of Ramakrishna came on the scene. It's a beautiful bit of our history. It is American history. Everything else that's American history, I wouldn't call that history. I'd call that a bunch of mistakes with a lot of suffering and karma to pay, wars and so forth. The teacher used to say, you Americans better be careful. 2 world wars are just past and a 3rd is on the horizon. He never made prophecies like that. You know, so maybe he was trying to wake some of the people in the front row up who had sat through too many of his lectures for years. But all of a sudden, wow, yeah, that's right. Right. Fall back asleep. So the 3 worlds arise in it, yet they do not affect its true nature. That's after Vivarta, false superposition, is understood as a Vedantic axiom. Then you must follow that up by saying, yes, but it didn't change the Atman 1 iota. It doesn't change me, no matter what happens. Like Tara, did I even bring it with me? Here it is, the Adhyatma Ramayana. Maybe we'll read some of that. Like Sri Ram talking to Tara about her question, whose bondage is this? It's a great point in a succession of human lifetimes where a question like that gets answered, gets asked and answered by an illumined soul. Here's my chance. Talk about that one moment where not only the ego lets down its defenses, but the teacher is there to inject this. Injection of Brahmagyan, as he used to say. The final one is achintya, incomprehensible. So, yes, I used to say, Sri Ramakrishna, you know, well, they say that Brahman cannot be known by the mind. Is that true, sir? Yes, not by the ordinary mind, but by the pure mind it can be known, because it is that. So, bondage is man, right? And then liberation is God in the same soul. So how that curtain can just be lifted and you can get a glimpse. Oh, it went back. God blog again, along with the green glasses. Sri Ramakrishna went to the pond, took his disciple, spread the moss, you know, this green scum, Maya, and looked in. So look at yourself now. So they both looked at each other, smiling at each other. Green scum came dancing back. Yeah, that moment was over. So that's the nature of Maya. And it's not a sentient evil out to get you. It's not like a devil figure. It's the nature of form to cover formlessness. So here you are in the world of name and form and time and space. Those are coverings. There's a covering power that's doing that. Avarana, it's called. And there's a distorting power that's making it worse. Vikshepa. But nobody ever looks for the revealing power. That's there too. The same soul bound is the same soul free, you see. So that would be at the philosophical and high consciousness level, but in the table or in the chair or in the sky or whatever, it's the same thing's happening. So incomprehensible, the Katha Upanishad says, Atman, hidden in all beings, reveals itself not to all, but only to the seers via their honed and subtle intellect. So this morning at meditation, Te Dhyan Yoga Nugata Pasyan, Devatma Shaktim, Svagunair Nagudam, Yaha Karanani Nikilani Tani, Kalatma Yutanya, Adidishta Yekaha. Right out of the Upanishads, you see. So basically, Te Dhyan Yoga. They practiced the yoga of meditation. Nugata Pasyan. Devatma Shaktim. They saw the Devatma Shaktim in everything. Before, she was covered by her own modes of nature. Gunas, karma, kala, death, various things. But they stripped those away, and then they saw her in everything. She had just been veiled before because their intellects were veiled by the covering power, by the distorting power. As soon as they polished the mirror of the mind, they saw her, see, and then meditated upon her, passed her time contently, and became free, you see, truly free, which is, the Atman is all the time. So beautiful quote from Katha Upanishad, and we will wrap up the 13 characteristics of the Atman by Sri Ramakrishna saying, that which is Atman is unattached. Maya is in it. One cannot see Atman. Sugar mixed with water disappears. Just so, when Atman gets mixed with the world, beings fail to notice it. Covering power, distorting power, so forth and so on. We're all bound now, you see. No, we're all free. No, actually, you're neither bound nor free. Read the Ashtavakra Samhita and know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So we do take this up once a year maybe to enforce for us and encourage us if otherwise, that thou art that. Let darkness go, the will of the wisp that leads with blinking light to pile more gloom on gloom. This thirst for life forever quench. It drags from birth to death and death to birth of soul. So, another verse from Sangha Sannyasin. They conquer all who conquer self. Know this and never yield. Say Om Tat Sat Om. So you have to be that unyielding soul, knowing that all of these are your true nature. Next time a problem, or let's put it, whenever a Vedantist encounters a problem, immediately they're trained to think, if they don't already know, this can be overcome. This can be taken away by the force of my own thinking power. Before people were talking about positive thought, in America, Swami Vivekananda started that ball rolling. You know, look through these calendars they're putting out of Vivekananda. You flip over each day, you can have a daily hit of Vivekananda's wisdom. 2/3 of them are about the power of positive thought, which in 2,000 years before that was in the hands of Patanjali, right? When he talked about klista and aklista vrittis. You're get rid of these negative thoughts with these positive thoughts. And then you can think about no thought. Don't jump the gun on it yet. I don't know, let's see, we have what, 15 minutes or so?
20.
15 or 20 minutes that we can at least get into the 5 cosmic bondages. So settle yourself, take another new breath. That is, we say, in-breath, held breath, out-breath, and think of the prana coming back if it's left you, if it's deserted you. Come back, stay, good boy. And take a look at the overall outlay of this great teaching in Vedanta. 5 cosmic bondages: avidya, root ignorance; linga, attachment to form; pramachadika, attachment to nature; kama, desire; karma, good, bad, and mixed actions. This is how they put it, and all the bullet points under it. But if you'll notice, there's some ovals that these are all connected to. So that's called the 3 great desires. So that's why I just chanted, this thirst for life, forever quenched. It drags from birth to death, death to birth of soul. They conquer all who conquer self. So the 5 cosmic bondages, they studied them. They saw them in the people of the day. They saw them in people who visited their country from other countries. India may not have gone out with its teachings to other countries very much until Vivekananda brought them in no uncertain terms. But of course, the Buddhists and so forth were leaving India, Tibet, going to Tibet, and taking teachings out. But Shankara stayed pretty much inside India and never ventured out. So by the time these teachings begin to really come to us, to the West in a full, robust form, that is specifically the Vedanta, then we find that they had looked at all sides of this problem, the asat problem. If you say, I'm neither form nor formlessness and I'm not bound or liberated, you should probably also be saying, I'm neither existence nor non-existence, because that's another very high duality, asat and sat. And people get caught in that one, like great philosophers. So you can see how avidya, number 1, and pramachadika, number 3, are both attached to desire for the worlds. Basically, that's called loka anuvartanam. Lokas are worlds. So these two pretty much are connected, you see. That's why I put them overlapping in that overall desire for the worlds. I want existence. You'll see what I mean when I read through this. Like your ancestors want existence in form and bodies. That's become, according to the Father of Yoga, a habit. And we can see then Lord Buddha came along about 550 BC and said that this was a problem, that you were caught on this round of ancestors. And evidently the ancestor worship, Pitri Loka, was not very much kept free and consciously done. It had become more ritualistic. And you're sort of like when Martin Luther was on the scene and so forth with Christianity, basically. Then their priests were accepting money so that your ancestors could get to heaven. You were like praying for already dead people to get to heaven, right? So religion always falls into this problem. So at Buddha's time, this is why he took up the fourfold suffering and the Eightfold Path, Four Noble Truths and Eightfold Path, to get people back to the right way of thinking about things that was possibly divorcing itself from religion. Because religion has a tendency to have its duality too, called irreligion. That's another word Swamiji brought forth when he was here, when he saw irreligion in the world. So there's that, and then you see number 2 and number 4. Linga, which is attachment to forms, is connected to kama, desire. That probably is pretty obvious. I mean, everything from the way people get attracted to each other, to have children, or to experience sensual pleasures, to getting attracted to other forms like objects, food, and so forth. These are all based in that deha anuvartanam. Deha means bodies. So there's a great desire for that, and that's why it connects those two. And you see, Shastra, Anuvarjanam, is the desire for religious ceremonies. I was just talking about that, wasn't it? So basically, religion can become attached to its ceremonials and forget who they're doing the ceremony for, number one. And number two, forget that they are that which they're doing the ceremony for. Whether, aren't you your ancestors? Didn't you come from your fathers and mothers? So even at that level, you're one body. Maybe in 3 different worlds, but you're one body. But if you change that up and say, I'm one with the rishis, I'm one with the knowers of Brahman, and all of a sudden this is a much higher thought and a much deeper way to go, much higher lokas and worlds. And all of a sudden you're connected with the Sapta rishis and the Trinity, and your mind is able to hold on to those things to such an extent that this thirst for life forever quench happens. You're not desiring bodies, desires, forms, and religious ceremonies anymore. You got over that. But the priestcraft doesn't get over it. Just like the ancestors and humans are looping all the time, there's a loop happening here with the priestcraft of all religions. They're really into that, and they like to control the ancestors and get their money. You almost could call worship of religious ceremonials, as they're doing here, a cosmic bondage, a great desire that could even be seen as separate from what's going on. It's feeding on the ancestor loop, would be a way of putting it. Lands, money, whatever they get, I want them to give it here to the church so we can fill the coffers, so we can control the people. It's an old story. Vivekananda has some acid-like things to say about the Brahmin priests in India. And when he came here to see the Christian priests, more acid he poured on them. He said, I came here and told them the truth because they'd never seen a man in their life, the Christian priests, who was not attached to a woman, was not attached to money, did not own property. They'd never seen this before. I started speaking the truth of the Upanishads. They didn't like it. In secret, they went running to the Bible to start to change things, because they knew this word would get around and the roots would be uncovered. Religion was a covering power. And that's what happens. Go back to the Gita. Krishna says it. From age to age, yuge yuge chadharmasha, I have to come back and restore the Dharma. Because over the long efflux of time, this is the most popular English translation of that sloka, over the long efflux of time, all religions fall, all dharmas fall, which is why Buddha came along when he did, and why Vivekananda is here now. So, is that good information that might want you to study something like this, like they did, so that you'll be absolutely certain of what's real and what's not real, and how to stay away from what's unreal, and take to yourself what is the Lord's? Isn't that enough reason to spend some time in it? We think so. Te Dhyan Yoga, Devatma Shaktim. We think that she's at the root of all this. And Jnanam, she wants you to have that knowledge that clears up your ignorance so you can be free. So that took up some time, but we still have some minutes. That's a good introduction to this. So I wanted to take them each, of course. Root ignorance is avidya. Basically, assumption of individuality would be the first thing. So if you could say, I and my father are one, that's true individuality to Swami Vivekananda. That's the real individual. That's the real self you're talking about, not the fragmented self, where many egos are getting together in these rounds and cycles of kala chakras, and all sorts of karmas and everything are arising. That's why it's connected to karma, and how you'll see these all overlap. Engagement in mental projection. Now, already, why didn't I hear this before? Because other religions aren't talking about it. To other religions, life is to be lived. To India, life's to be renounced. what does it sound like to you, this thirst for life forever quenched? Is he pulling any punches there? Is he telling you, yes, go for it. Enjoy it, have fun. You see. The children of Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother, she said, my children, Sri Ramakrishna's children, have not come here to have fun. Why? Because they know how important it is that they've received the boon of a human body. They're not going to waste their human birth on more frivolity. They're serious about it. And you look at, it's a good study. Take pictures of the 16 direct disciples and do a study of them. Not just words. Those are there. The picture. I took Swami Premananda's picture the other day because I was putting up a God blog about him. Struck by the seriousness of the man. He's named Love and Bliss. You just look at him, this is an uncommon soul. And then I went a couple weeks ago and saw Kali, Kali. Swami Abhedananda was named Kali. Sri Ramakrishna took him like by the scruff of the neck when he was a boy to Holy Mother. This boy's good, he'll serve you. So he got to grow up with Holy Mother. And most men didn't even get to see her. So here is this Swami Abhedananda, and I just got absorbed in his face and eyes. This is a really illumined soul who later became the head of the New York Vedanta Society that Swami Vivekananda started. Right there, the two different centers on the West End and East End. You can go there still. So these are great souls you have darshan with, even with their picture you can have darshan with. And probably good to start with that and then envision them in your mind's eye. Hello, Kali, are you there? No, not that Kali, I mean the little Kali. I don't see the big Kali yet. So I'm just talking about, you don't get teachings like this. They're very uncommon. Mental projection, what's that, people would say? You're talking some sort of psychobabble or Western psychology or something? No, we're talking about cosmic bondage. That's the very root of things. It's the root of all that bothers and ails you. Your own ego came into being somehow, and then it's in cahoots with the mind and the intellect, and its thoughts, projected things, got into it. I finally had to make up a story for that because there wasn't very many good ones. So I said, the wizard with his wand created a world, loved it. He was so amazed he dropped his wand. Then he stepped into his world to enjoy it. He got involved in it and wanted out eventually because he saw it was just a projection of his own mind, but he had left his wand outside, you see. So he couldn't get back to it. Be gone, you see. Come delusion, come illusion, as a good God blog there too, for Sri Ramakrishna's saying. So, how to make that magic that you created, that Maya magic, go away. Like Maya magic in King Lavanya's court, a beautiful story in Lord Vashishta, in Vashishta's Yoga. You should read that soon. And if you read those scriptures after having studied something like that, the scriptures click for you. If you read the scriptures before you've covered a lot of this ground, you're just going, oh, that's nice, you see. Or you just go to, oh yeah, I read the Gita, I read the Gospel. But what about making it click for you? Because you know the language. Like, you go to Spain, you have a good time, he said. But if you learn Spanish and then go to Spain, it's a lot more than a good time. You really connect with the place. So those two things right away, are uncommon teachings that people aren't looking at very much. Maintenance of a separate existence. Well, sure, I should do that. But with who in charge? With the ahamkara in charge, the body-mind mechanism in charge? Or do you want to steal a march? In that story, Steal a March. You'll see it on a God blog soon. It's basically that these two armies, these two commanders, were destined to war with each other. God didn't predestine that. Karma did. by the way. God doesn't do that kind of thing, which is another uncommon teaching we should probably take seriously. Anyway, these two armies started moving towards each other from their various countries, and they each wanted to gain high ground. And they know if they made these middle mountains and gained high ground, they would probably have the advantage in the battle. So they were both close to that mountain, and it was nighttime. They were tired, started to go to sleep. But one commander said, "Wake up, we're going to march all night. You don't have a little food, you don't get any sleep, we're going to march, we're going to gain the high ground." So that army stole a march on this army, Sri Ramakrishna said. That's how it got put in English. They stole the march. So they reached high ground. They might have been tired, but they had high ground. And then they could rest, you see. So what is he saying? You have to gain the high ground on your ego. You have to gain the high ground on your mind. You have to gain high ground on your thoughts. You have to gain high ground on manas, on the intellect, on buddhi. These are insentient principles, and they're ruling you. They have the high ground. The Atman doesn't. But shouldn't it have the high ground? Is there any reason why it shouldn't? You might want to ask that question. So in somewhat of a disgusted mood, I end the first half, just even thinking that we wouldn't steal a march back from insentient principles and become our true self again. Jai Shri Guru Om. Yeah.